From now on, we're going to start the session titled The Korean Peace Process in Transition, Breakthrough or Status Quo. First of all, I would like to introduce the moderator of the session. The moderator is Professor Kim Tae-hwan from Korea National Diplomatic Academy. He served as the Director of Public Diplomacy at Korea Foundation. Now he's Professor of Public Diplomacy at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Professor, please take the floor. Thank you. I am Kim Tae-hwan from Korea National Diplomatic Academy. I am very much glad to be the moderator of the session, and personally, I think this is a very interesting session. The title of the session is Korean Peace Process in Transition, Breakthrough or Status Quo. In some sense, this could be sounding radical, and it's hard to give answer to the title of the session, but it seems like the question is requiring us to answer the question. So the content in the title is very important, and many Koreans would take interest in the theme of the session. Today, we have 3 panelists for the session. So the panel composition is very interesting. Also, we have a very interesting mixture of panelists. First of all, although there is a panelist who cannot make it to this hall, but we have Dr. Go Yu-hwan, who is here with us online, the president of Korea Institute for National Unification. As you know very well, Dr. Go Yu-hwan is the renowned expert about North Korean affairs. Thank you very much for your presence, Dr. Go. And next panelist is Mr. Choi Jin-wook. Now he's the director of the Center for Strategic and Cultural Studies. And from the previous administration, from 2014 till 2017, Mr. Choi served as the president of Unification Research Institute. That institute is Korea's top research institute in the area of North Korean affairs. And these 2 panelists are really Korea's top best renowned experts in the area of North Korean studies. And one person of the 2 are now leading the North Korean policies advisory in the present administration, and the second panelist was serving the previous administration. As you know, the current administration and the previous administration have slightly different stance on North Korean policies. So we have the very interesting mixture of panelists, and we will be able to have interesting discussion today. And last but not least, we have Mr. John Dillary. He's the typical Yale man. He learned at Yale University, and he received a master's degree and PhD as well from Yale University. If there was a high school in Yale, he might have gone to the Yale High School, and maybe if there was Yale kindergarten, he may have attended the kindergarten. So he's the typical Yale gentleman. Now he's the professor of Chinese studies at GSIS at Yonsei University. As you know, Professor John Dillary is the renowned expert in Chinese studies. So China is a neighboring country to North Korea. He has conducted a lot of prolific writing activities related to North Korea, and he has great influence on foreign affairs policies. Especially, he has been contributing prolific articles and contribution regarding North Korean affairs and policies. In my opinion, Professor John Dillary is a pro-engagementist regarding North Korean affairs. So, as a scholar, so that's his posture as a scholar, not as some politician. So he's a scholar. So we today have well-balanced composition of panelists. So today we will be able to have very interesting discussion. So my first question is the most important question for the session. So it will be difficult for you to give short answer clearly. However, so we're talking about whether either breakthrough or status quo. The current presidential administration has less than 1 year before the end of the term of the office. Next presidential election is scheduled for next March. So we don't have enough time to pursue some special options towards North Korean policies. And in this situation, can we make a breakthrough in the Korea peace process? In the Korea Peace Process Initiative, do we have enough time to achieve a major breakthrough? Or rather, it might be better for us to just keeping and managing status quo. So it may be better focusing on maintaining status quo so that the next government or next administration will be able to continue working on North Korean policies. So some people say that maintaining status quo is more realistic option. So for this question, I'd like to listen to the three panelists' idea, and then we will have discussion. I'd like to ask Dr. Go to start first, making comments.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kim. And East Asia Foundation hosted this meaningful conference, so very thank you. Related to the question, actually, North nuclear issue, whether we have negotiation or not, actually capability of the North Korean nuclear capability is advancing. So separate from that, the non-proliferation and peace establishment talks needs to keep going. So like managing the stable management, the term when we consider the urgency of the issue, that the stable management is not something that we have to consider. It refers to that we prevent worsened situation, but the capability of North nuclear is further developing at the moment as well. So stable management is not enough. Biden administration has reviewed and has completed review process of the North Korean policy of the former president, and it proposed North Korea policy. So it means that the window is opening for a new negotiation. We have just 1 more year left for Moon administration, and also the new president will come to power next year. So I think at this moment, stable management is not enough to deal with the nuclear issue of the North. So I think we need to put more efforts in resuming talks with the North. That is what I think. Thank you for your answer, Mr. Ko. I will summarize his comments. Rather than a realistic situation, his comments is based on some kind of justification for the resumption of the talks or efforts. I will give you short and brief comments. You are saying that we should not be satisfied with the stable management. We have to go for some breakthrough. That's what you intend, right? Then I think what types of breakthrough we need to make. When you say breakthrough, what is that? When we make some breakthrough, it means that peace and non-proliferation exchange process needs to start, and actually we have to revisit the whole process. It's very difficult to tell you all the details, but since the breakdown of Hanoi deal, until the U.S. will come out with the new calculation, the North said that it would wait and see. Indeed, Biden administration have reviewed all the North Korean policies of the four previous governments, and it also provided some like new approaches. So, regardless of our intention or willingness, actually there is some environment is created for new talks. So in this regard, Korea's summit and talks with the alliances, that was the basis for the new administration's approaches of new administration Biden. So under these circumstances, the goal of our efforts, if it would end without any results, then Panmunjom Declaration and Joint Declaration will go dead. So under these circumstances, those agreements need to be maintained. And also we have to go forward based on that agreement and deals. So we need communication between the two Koreas to make a breakthrough. So what I understand is that he means the breakthrough is something like kind of resuming of the negotiation between the North and the U.S. That's what the breakthrough that you think. And Mr. Che?
I am very glad to be part of this panel session. Nice to meet you all. Here, we have two choices. One is to manage the status quo, the other is breakthrough. When we make breakthrough, what are we going to break through? Is it about Korea-US alliance or the public opinion of Korea or the rigid attitude of North Korea? What is the object that we want to break through? So the target of breakthrough is important. Of course, we need dialogue and negotiation. But first of all, we have to define the object or the target of breakthrough. In my opinion, this is a very difficult question. Whether we choose breakthrough or status quo, we have to have a deep look into the situation. During the Nixon president administration, he visited China. The former President Nixon visited China and had a historical summit there and changed the flow of history and ended the Cold War. So the determination of Nixon president was highly praised. Such determination is important, but former President Kennedy actually was refraining himself from contacting China. What does that mean? The former President Kennedy, at that time, so there was a lot of criticism over Chinese policy because when many people were dying from hunger and starving, many international community, when many people were dying in China from hunger, Kennedy argued that we have to help China. But when Kennedy became the president, Kennedy was actually refraining from contacting China. But that act was a strategic act, I think. So we need dialogue, negotiation, and we need to lift the tension on the Korean Peninsula. But now there are sanctions imposed by the U.S. And if South Korea comes out saying that we are going to lift our sanction on North Korea and we're going to go in a direction that is against the U.S. action, then that will create a lot of controversy. So when we make breakthrough, we need to be careful. So you made a very important point. When we want to achieve breakthrough, what is the target of the breakthrough? Is the target of breakthrough the public opinion of the Korean people, the attitude of North Korea, or the U.S.-Korean alliance? Then, in your opinion, now the current administration, let's simplify the situation. During the remaining term of the office of the current administration, do you think that the current administration needs to focus on maintaining the status quo? Is that your opinion? It seems that the Korean government is now making another trial, maybe the last trial, to make a breakthrough in the inter-Korean relations. Of course, the Korean government may be willing to do that. However, we don't think that the Korean government has high expectation for some positive outcome. As you know, the public support for Korean government's North Korean policy is below 30%. This is not just the problem of Moon Jae-in administration, but every administration has the public support decrease below 30% in terms of North Korean policies. Now, actually, one time, the public support for the government's North Korean policies raised to 80% one time in the past. But now, the public support for the Korean government's North Korean policy plummeted to below 30%. So it seems that the Korean government is now trying to make another trial to resume the improvement of relations with North Korea. But Korean people do not believe in North Korea. Less than 50% of Korean people believe that North Korea will be willing to give up its nuclear program. And many Korean people do not want the US or other countries to lift the sanction on North Korea. So these days, if you consider the momentum of the current government in its efforts to improve the relations with North Korea, so I understand that the Korean government has goodwill, but if you look at the behaviors of North Korea blowing up the Kaesong Joint Liaison Office, then, and also North Korea said it's going to give up the Yongbyon nuclear facilities, but it was hiding some uranium enrichment facilities. So considering the nuclear capabilities of the North Korean and regarding the issues related to U.S.-Korea alliance, I don't think the public will support the idea of making breakthrough. Thank you. It seems that you two have different position. You have different opinions from each other. Dr. Choi has now mentioned that considering the public's opinion about North Korean policies and considering the attitude and behavior of North Korea and considering the stance of the U.S. on North Korea, for example, the U.S. is solidly maintaining the sanction on North Korea. So considering all this context, making a breakthrough in the short period of time will be unrealistical. That's the opinion of Dr. Choi.
Yeman, John, what do you say to that?
Well, thank you, Tae-hwan, for your kind introduction. I apologize, and thank you to the East Asia Foundation for including me. I feel like someone usually flies coach suddenly got a first-class seat with these great North Korea scholars. So I'm really honored to be on this panel. And I'm sorry that my spoken Korean after over 10 years, still not good enough. I blame that on my Yale education. I also prepared too much material, Tae-hwan, so I'll divide it into sort of two parts because I really like the title of this panel, like you did, and I it was quite helpful for me to think about status quo versus breakthrough. But I thought about it in two different ways. You know, academics always use descriptive versus normative. So I'll share kind of my descriptive analysis. And for me, I tend to look at four principal actors, the two Koreas, the United States and China. And when I analyze this coldly, as you said, I'm a pro-engagement scholar. That's fair as a label. But I also can separate what I think versus what I see. So when I look at the four players, I see a lot of inertia behind this current status quo. So making a breakthrough looks very difficult. I think you could say we're in a sort of high-level equilibrium trap, where even though it's not sustainable, it's not a great situation for a number of the players, it's hard for them to break out of it. So let me go through that quickly. Actually, in my view, China is the happiest with this current status quo. I think for Beijing, the current situation is quite comfortable. China's post-Cold War strategy, as I understand it, and as they've said it, I take them at face value, has been to have good relations with both Koreas and have basic stability on the Korean Peninsula. And that's what we're seeing. China has a pretty good relationship now. They've repaired their relationship with the DPRK, which was in a terrible state not that long ago in 2017. And they've also repaired the relationship with the ROK, which also was in a terrible state at the bottom in the THAAD period. So I think China sort of likes this. Things are stable. North Korea is keeping the provocations quite down to a minimum, which saves Beijing a big headache. And also North Korea, for now, has moved a bit back into China's orbit, which they like, and they like to know what's going on. So I think China is kind of most invested, actually, in this current status quo. The United States, with the Biden administration, they're comfortable for now because North Korea has become a very low priority issue. I think everyone's aware of that in the United States. It went from the top national security issue in 2017 to now quite low on the list. And it will remain low so long as North Korea stays as quiet as it is. The moment North Korea starts serious weapons testing, it goes right back up the ladder. But there's not much else to move it up the ladder short of that. And so for the Biden administration, which has so much on its plate, this status quo really comes down to you don't have to pay a huge amount of attention to North Korea. It's not ideal, but it's easy for them to kind of get in a rut with that and feel comfortable with that. And then for the two Koreas, and we've already had better analysis on this, but my thoughts would be, in terms of South Korea, I agree with points that have already been made. I mean, I think we all know President Moon wants a breakthrough before his time is up. But I agree, in my view, the South Korean public, North Korea is not a top issue. It's maybe not as low as to Americans, but you know, what do South Koreans care about? What are the issues that are going to drive next year's election? Who thinks it's going to be North Korea? I don't think it's going to be North Korea. It's going to be real estate, jobs, justice and social fairness, you know, corruption, a whole range of issues. I think you have to go pretty far down the list. Again, unless North Korea really starts to act out. And even then, probably these other issues are more important. So there's a gap between what the Blue House, its prioritization, and the public. And so that puts, again, that's a kind of inertia from a South Korean perspective. And then lastly, in terms of North Korea, you know, I think that Kim Jong-un, we all have different views of Kim Jong-un. My view has always been and remains that he is a very ambitious leader. Ambition is the key adjective to describe Kim Jong-un. And I also think in 2018, a year of breakthroughs, he revealed what his ambition is. When he said we have a new strategic line, we're putting all efforts on economic development. To me, that is the central core of Kim Jong-un. However, he is not going to jeopardize national security to achieve economic development. He is not going to allow social instability and the risk of breakdown to achieve economic development. And what we often tend to forget, especially in democratic societies, is his timeline is totally different than ours. We right now in South Korea are on a political timeline of months. In the United States, it's a political timeline of 3+ years. Kim Jong-un is still a young man. We obsess about his health. We see he's lost weight and think he's going to die and start talking about it. But I doubt he thinks that way. He's a young man as a leader, and he has decades in his own mind to think about achieving that ambition. So we have to always remind ourselves that he's on a very different timeline. So I think that in that sense, this status quo, in my view, is not ideal for Kim Jong-un. He's very dependent on China. I don't think he likes that. I don't think he'll keep that forever. And they're not making economic progress. And I don't think he will, his ambition will be satisfied with that over the long term.
I mean, you mean the status quo from the perspective of Kim Jong-un?
Correct,
Okay,
correct. The North Korean status quo. But if we're talking about, as we've kind of framed this, Korean peace process, and we don't know what's coming next in South Korean politics. So for the remainder of the Moon administration, this status quo, in my analysis of North Korea, looks, they can handle this. I mean, we see reports about the price of bananas going up. We see reports about maybe some more serious currency instability still. And Kim Jong-un himself has talked about a food crisis. So these are significant. But, North Korea can endure suffering to a degree that most societies cannot. They are rigged for that. They are good at that. And I don't think we're close to the point where they can't take the kind of pain that they're in. And so I think that Kim Jong-un and North Korean system can ride this out for a while. So that's why maybe later I can talk about normatively what I think we all should do. But descriptively, these are the reasons that when I analyze the four parties, I think this status quo could easily continue for a while.
Okay, thank you very much, John. 우리
Dr. Go and Dr. Che. So after the panels finish comments, if you have any question to each other, you may share questions and answers. You don't need to ask me to allow you to ask questions. So we first of all heard opinions from the three panelists for the grand topic. And Dr. Go and Dr. Che had different opinion from each other. And Professor Dillary talked about descriptive aspects and normative aspects. And it seems like he has positioned himself very well between the two panelists. And Dr. Go mentioned that the breakthrough could have the significant meaning because it will help the North Korea and the U.S. resume the denuclearization negotiation. But the situation is very frustrating. We don't know details about this. No detail is open. We just know rough facts. Telegrated pragmatic approach is what we know. And Biden's new North Korean policy is the third way, something between the Trump administration and Obama administration. This is not big deal approach. This is not top-down approach. This is not strategic approach either. So it seems that the Biden administration would like to have gradual negotiation and take a step-by-step action and move forward towards the full denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. So people who do not know very well about North Korean issues may feel like they're just surrounded by the mist. So Biden administration reviewed the North Korean policies. And what does that mean to the Korean peace process? What do you think the Biden administration's review of North Korean policies will affect the Korean peace process? I don't think I have totally different opinion from Dr. Go. It's just that it's just a matter of how we do things. I basically fully agree with the necessity for dialogue and negotiation, but it's just that what kind of strategies are we going to use? I think that the current government has been weak in terms of using strategies. In terms of strategy, we need to create the public opinion, and we need to care for the relations with the U.S. as well. But I just feel that the Korean government came up with just the discourse saying that we're going to achieve peace through dialogue and without any specific great strategies. So policies are just supposed to be changed depending on the changing international circumstances. So
and the U.S. reviewed the North Korean policy, then what strategy we have to find? You are asking that, I think. And in a bigger trend, the U.S. North policy is not in between the two. Like it goes back to the past, I think. Negotiation is a solution for the current situation. Actually, Trump is the only president to have negotiation with the to intend to have negotiation, but I think Biden's administration went back to the past in terms of North policy. Oh, you said it went back to the past. What do you mean by that? Basically, the U.S. administration maintained status quo since Cold War. The Korean government wants changes, but the U.S. government wants status quo. And since the Cold War, just right before the collapse of the North, the U.S. wanted just non-proliferation and soft landing for the North. That's what the U.S. government wanted so far. And there was some changes, regime changes, and with status quo is the national interest for the U.S. That's what I think. Whether anyway, but the South Korean government want changes, whether it is unification or something others. But it's kind of tension or disagreement or disaccordance. There is something like that. So the South needs to accept the situations, and we have to consider what the U.S. wants and what we want. But the current Korean government push for only their strategy. Actually, I think the U.S. North policy is targeting China, not the North itself. So the national interests of the South and of the U.S. is considered. But so we have to consider all that, but we push for only our policies without considering all the circumstances. The status of the Japan and the relations between the U.S. and China, we have to comprehensively consider all these circumstances in pushing for North policy. If there is some changes on the Korean Peninsula, then do we have some good relationship with China? We haven't thought that. If it happens that it goes against the national interest of the North, so I think we have to consider all the circumstances. I will ask one more question. I'm not an expert in the North. You said Biden's policy seems to go back to the past. The stance of the U.S. traditionally has maintained the status quo since the Cold War, so it went back to the past. But I'm not an expert, so I think over the last 25 years, the nuclear capability of the North has advanced a lot remarkably, and also it has capability of carrier of ICBM. So not just simple status quo, but missile capability of the North. I think we have to address that issue, and of course, as John said,
foreign policy. 그럼에도 불구하고
Even that, in any way, we have to address this. Then we should not say it's just the policies went back to the past. There could be some differences in that comment. The relations between the U.S. and China, and like within a wider framework and circumstances, there is no changes. Actually, the strength and the capability, nuclear capability of the North threatens the Korean Peninsula. So some deterrence is also pushed. But there is no differences between the two strategies. The Trump wanted to have talks with the North, but Biden just wants to isolate the North. I think the two are not that different. Like improving relations between the two, if we are in a tension status, then we need to support that. Actually, I think we need to adjust the speed if we want to have a good relationship with the North. So anyway, I think we need to
Share
On
your,
the
your
Biden?
view on Biden administration's North Korea policy.
Yeah, thanks, Taekwon. So I'd say a couple things. First of all, they did a policy review, which is backward looking. And they said, we're not going to do what's been done before. Maybe they did a classified strategic plan.
Mhm.
Maybe they have one. From what we can see publicly, I don't see indications
Mhm.
that they've done or have acting on a North Korea strategy plan.
Mhm.
I think they've got and are working on a strategic plan for China, for the China challenge, for U.S.-China strategic competition. I think we know there is a strategic plan for China. And North Korea, the Korean Peninsula is certainly part of that. I think they have a strategic plan for non-proliferation. And Iran is a bigger priority because there's a clearer process and there's kind of a clearer win.
Mhm.
And they worked on that issue and had success before, and Trump threw it out. And so it's kind of cleaner, clearer play
Mhm.
for Iran. So they're working on non-proliferation. And of course, North Korea is an issue there, but it's so much harder to see where's the win, where's the play with North Korea. So that's the first thing I would say is I actually don't think they have a North Korea specific strategy or plan. Secondly, when we talk about peace, the conceit of our discussion, Korean peace process, that's a South Korean discourse. That is not a Washington discourse.
Mhm.
I mean, we could maybe go find a panel in Washington on Korean peace process, but that's probably because South Korean, scholars, experts, organizations at some point are saying, shouldn't we also talk about a peace process? It is just not a really meaningful concept in the American language of North Korea. Denuclearization obviously is the thing that matters. There's a lot of realism and fatalism by now about the fact that you sort of aren't going to get it anytime soon, if ever. But it's a meaningful thing. It's the meaningful thing to talk about. Trump was very interesting in that, and the Trump diplomacy of 2018 was interesting, or the Trump Moon diplomacy, because there was coordination between the Trump and Moon teams where they got a phrase in there, and you can go look up the tweets, peace and denuclearization. That was the name of what they were doing. So the South Korean side was pushing peace and a peace process, and the Americans were pushing denuclearization. And Trump was an outlier because he was sort of okay with the Singapore framework of new relations, establishing new relations. That's the key phrase. It's used 3 times in that short document. And that's, of course, something that the North Koreans want. That's meaningful to them, a new relationship with the United States. And Trump was a very unusual actor, and that he was like, fine, that sounds good to me. We have a terrible relationship. Let's have a new relationship. So that was getting close, but still that wasn't peace, And so as far as the last thing I would say, as far as the Biden administration, I mean, I see it could go in a number of different directions. And I think we should hold off definitive judgment at this point. I think there'll be, there are other factors, including South Korea, which is, of course, they have an alliance strategy. They care about alliances. They value the health and strength of the U.S. ROK alliance in a way that the Trump administration did not. The president certainly did not. So that's a major factor on what they would do or not do vis-a-vis North Korea. So I think they could go in a lot of different directions, actually. I don't dismiss this as, oh, it's strategic patience again. But also it's been long enough. They're not proactive. They're not out there taking bold steps or even, frankly, particularly interesting steps. There's some positive steps, like appointing Sung Kim was a positive step, filling that position. But then he's a half-time job, and he hasn't, so far, publicly, we haven't seen him actually put something on the table except, we'll talk with you anywhere, anytime. That's fine to say that. But that's not really a way to lure a North Korean. When you really want to talk to a North Korean, that's not what you say. So it's in this, they're leaving a lot of options open. I don't think they've closed off options, and they have different tendencies. And I could see them moving in different directions.
Thank you. 최 원장님 하실 말씀 있는가요?
Mr. Che, I think you have some comments. John Dollary's comment is very good. I think I agree with him. What the U.S. wants is non-proliferation and peace go together. The peace process on the Korean Peninsula started in going against the post-Cold War. The unification seems unrealistic, and people think that it costs a lot if we have to unification, and the U.S. wants a status quo. So it is risky. So that's what peace process started. But the North see it as non-proliferation, it works as a deterrence to the U.S. The U.S. does not ignore the ability of the North's capability, but the non-proliferation needs to be based on nuclear-free, or it could be some deterrence, and it could be some demolition of North Korean regime. The target-oriented strategy. It is not the U.S. strategy. The target is the North. However, the U.S. government is thinking about to come up with new strategies, details. So I think the policy is quite different. So lifting sanctions and exchanging, promote exchanges with the North. That is our target, but the U.S. see bigger picture, and we have to understand that, and we have to set our strategy for that. Thank you for your answer, John and Mr. Che. Not totally same comment, but the peace process, what the South wants, and the peace process and the North approaches of the U.S., the two are a little bit different. And Mr. Che said that the discourse of peace and unification and non-proliferation, there is some tension. Mr. Ko, you feel very burdened. The policy review of Biden and the comment of the two panelists here, you have to give us some comment on them. The U.S. policy is helpful for breakthrough. Biden administration's policy review is done. The strategic patience failed, and grand bargain of Trump failed. That's what Biden concluded. So the Biden administration needs to find a new solution and approach. But it is not that we failed to address this issue because we did not have any innovative solution. Before, the threat of the North was controllable by the US. That's what the US understood in the past. However, the North completed its capability of the North, like nuclear arms, and also it established ICBM system. So the US thinks that it is not controllable. So the US is not able to include North policy into other Asia Pacific strategies. So in terms of non-proliferation and in terms of global strategy, the advanced ability of North Korean nuclear arms, it is something that we have to just go without serving this. So in terms of priority, actually Biden was moving very quickly in reviewing the policies, and also the review results was sent to the South government. So I do not agree that the North is not high priority of the North policy of Biden administration. I think we have to understand the substance and essence of the current status. Mr. Kim wants the conditional non-proliferation. He wants it's secure, rhythm security is guaranteed. If it is guaranteed, then he would scrap nuclear program. That is the starting of process considered by the North. And the peace establishment on the Korean Peninsula is related to non-proliferation. Peace and denuclearization should turned into kind of exchangey process of security versus security. We have to create that system in Singapore with the 4 pillars. The Trump failed to set up some roadmap for peace process, so we are now at this situation. The detailed of Biden North policy has not been revealed. In first, the U.S. and Korean conservative politics, they set strategies of strategic persistence, and with that status, we all failed to prevent the North from advancing its nuclear development. And we, in the past, we thought that the time goes by, then the North would collapse. Second, conditional denuclearization. The agreed framework and joint declaration, the non-proliferation was not top priority in that joint declaration. And the joint declaration suggests that we have to see some progress in non-proliferation, then we could have talks. So it failed to have the talks. The U.S. recognized North nuclear as a threat. So the U.S. set its policy, but the U.S. set its policy targeting the China, so it means that U.S. lost its focal point in North policy. In the past, the U.S. wanted China engaged in the North policy, but Trump excluded China in negotiation with the North in a top-down strategy. Actually, China has very broad influence on the North, but the U.S. government failed because sometimes it excluded and sometimes it included China into the North Korean policy. And also, when we think about the regime of the North, Biden's policy seems a little bit efficient, but it could face some backfire domestically. And Trump wanted to have the deal with the North, but Trump thought that it could cause some backfire from the national, the U.S. people. So, in conclusion, the U.S. strategy failed. The very special system of
So North Korea has its unique governance system. So the existing government strategies did not have deep understanding on North Korea's governance system. Sometimes the North Korean regime felt like it was being insulted. So what is the motivation for North Korea to possess nuclear? North Korea's willingness to possess nuclear was much stronger than the international society's efforts for denuclearization. In order to resolve the North Korean nuclear issues, the international society or Korea and the US will have to have stronger intention to solve the nuclear issues and achieve denuclearization. Sorry that connection was not really good. Regarding the approach to North Korean issues, he classified different approaches that have been taken so far, and he explained why those approaches failed. And he mentioned the security to security exchange. So I don't understand the specific content of that approach, but so in addition to the review of North Korean policies, we had Korea-US summit in May. In Korea, both opposition party and the ruling party showed positive response to the result of Korea-US summit meeting in May. So the Biden administration reviewed the North Korean policies, and in May, we had Korea-US summit meeting. And from my perspectives, the outcome of the Korea-US summit was very much substantial and positive, actually more positive than I actually expected. That's my personal opinion. So there has been a series of North Korean policies reviewed by the Biden administration, and we need to consider the outcome, especially the joint statement that came from the Korea-US summit in May. Then those two factors could help us resume our inter-Korean relations. Do you think those two factors will have positive influence on resuming the inter-Korean relations and dialogue? Dr. Choi? I'd like to make one more comment. Actually, Dr. Go mentioned a very important thing. We need to understand the intention of North Korea, and then we need to set our own stance, and we need to have stronger intention for denuclearization. I also agree with him, and I agree with the importance of dialogue, but no country does politics just by using intention. So we need to consider the North Korean capabilities, not just intention. Intention is not everything when we talk about politics. When North Korea says we don't have nuclear program, we're going to give up nuclear program, and can we really just trust their verbal promise? No, I don't think so. So he mentioned that intention is important, but capability is more important than intention. Actually, democratic countries do not wage war against each other, but this is not what I want to talk about. But countries that have nuclear include the UK, not only China and North Korea. UK also has nuclear program, but there's no security problem or controversies over the UK having nuclear. So if you can. So do you think that the UK possessing nuclear does not give threat to the US? So capability, nuclear capability is important, but intention is very important. So we cannot compare North Korea with the UK or France. The North Korea has the weapon capability to attack Washington or any other parts of the US. So they're different from UK or France. I want to believe in the intention of North Korea. According to a survey, over 50% of Korean people support having dialogue and negotiation with North Korea. It doesn't mean that Korean people believe in what North Korea says. What is the intention of North Korea, and can we trust North Korea? When we ask Korean people, do you believe in or do you trust North Korea? Then less than 25% of the Korean population say that we can trust North Korea. So a large proportion of Korean people do not trust North Korea. So in the peace process, we say that we need to have dialogue, although we do not trust North Korea for peace. We can have dialogue, but we shouldn't 100% trust North Korea. And sometimes during the process of negotiation and dialogue, sometimes we need to show some strong attitude and strict attitude. And also we need the capability to verify the denuclearization of North Korea. If North Korea says we don't have nuclear weapons just verbally, then we cannot just believe in their words only and then start dialogue. So in May, in the summit, they actually appointed Sung Kim as the special envoy to North Korea. And what they confirmed through the summit is that they can start negotiation or dialogue once North Korea agree with denuclearization process. So if North Korea just says that we can show only Yongbyon facility, we cannot show you any other facilities, and then the dialogue process could not be started.
So now the North has the choice. So I think it is a time for not a time for making decision. It is time for refraining, and it's time for being very cautious. The U.S. Secretary of State, John.
Let me just jump in case you have a new question, because this is one where I can disagree with both of my esteemed panelists and friends, which is always good for discussion. So in my view, stronger intention on denuclearization, it would not get us progress toward denuclearization. And I don't agree that at least if you look at the United States and the international community, the UN Security Council, you look even at Europe now, I don't think I actually fundamentally disagree. I think if anything, the problem has been too much focus on denuclearization. And I do think that that's actually an impediment to inter-Korean reconciliation, to the peace process, to normalization of relations, to finding areas where you can lower risks, lower tension, build some confidence, and fundamentally change some dynamics. so I think that this is sort of a trap in that we insist on denuclearization, and then we look at North Korea, and occasionally we can eke out some kind of verbal or written agreement. A breakthrough of 2018 was that, correct me if I'm wrong, for the first time Kim Jong-un himself signed on to the ultimate goal of complete denuclearization. That doesn't mean he wants denuclearization or North Korea wants denuclearization. It is not in their interest to achieve denuclearization. That's what we all want for them. That's not what they want. It's frankly not good for them. They may do it eventually as part of another process. But if we continue with the approach we've had of just banging more and more loudly on this one drum, I think we're going to keep seeing the same result, which is actually it's been moving in the opposite direction.
Thank you, John. 전장님 뭐 거기 반응.
Could you give some comment, or would you have any more comment? No? Okay, thank you. Then we have a little more minutes. So I will take some comments or questions from the floor. You listen to the comments from the panelists today. But Mr. Ko, his connection is not good. So unfortunately, we could not re-invite him in this panel discussion. So please understand this situation. And I will receive some comments and questions from the floor. The three of panelists have a little bit different opinions and arguments. Very interesting. I think I do not need to revisit their comments. Question or comments, if you have any opinion, you could let us have. If you have any comments, please raise up your hand.
Loud.
Hi, my name is Jihyun. I'm from the East Asia Foundation. So, Professor, you mentioned that North Korea is the only status party who is not happy with the current status quo of not being engaged with North Korea. Do you think that it's a possibility or a probability that they'll start shooting missiles again just to start the peace process again? And second question would be, how is the South Korean government, how should they prepare for an eventual case where North Korea starts aggressive missile tests again?
Okay. While you thinking about the answer,
네, 어떻게 생각하시나요? 네, 뭐 많은 생각 갖고 있는 걸 알고 있지만, 네.
한두 분 더 질문.
If you have any more questions, we will take more questions and give answers. If any.
저는 전혜나입니다. 동아시아 파운데이션.
A question for Professor Dillary. You just mentioned that we have been knocking on North Korea's door, focusing much more on denuclearization, and you mentioned that maybe this is not the best way for to see results. So, do you have any suggestions for future, U.S. policy towards North Korea, and what do you think South Korean policy should do going forward? Thank you.
안녕하세요.
Hello, I'm from Kyunghee University. There is no North Korean people, so I will ask a question about the opinion of the North to two panelists. That we are in stalemates. The two wants some solution from each other. When we consider the condition of the North, and there is no suggestion from the U.S. The U.S. wants the North make some gesture first. Actually, the North had made the first gesture, but there is no some gesture given back from the U.S. So there is no cards from the U.S. So I think the U.S. strategy is kind of not plausible. And what the U.S. could show to drive the North come back to the negotiation table.
Just a short question to all the panelists, actually. How do you see the role of, let's say, third countries or third parties like the European powers, and more specifically, Russia?
Any other question from the floor? 4 people asked questions. 2 questions went to Professor John, and the other 2 questions to both of you. Professor John?
Okay, thank you. And can I suggest that Tae-hwan take the Russia question since you're a Russia expert? It's a great question. All great questions. So let's see. On the first of the 2 directed to me, you know, I heard so many excellent North Korea experts in the United States boldly predicting a major test starting in October of last year. You know, North Korea will test, October surprise. North Korea will test right at the tail end of the Trump administration. Then it was North Korea will test right after the election. And then it was they'll test right after inauguration. And we haven't had a full reckoning with how many predictions were wrong and the implications. And none of us do that. I don't do it either when my predictions are wrong. I just forget that I made those predictions. So, you know, if and when, but probably more when the more provocative level, not the small scale stuff that we need to just get used to, and I think are starting to get used to. And the Biden administration had a very tempered, measured reaction in what was it, March, when there were some missile tests. And basically they said, look, we can't overreact to this. And so that was appropriate. But the problem will be if and when that happens, I don't think we can prejudge. It's not necessarily, you know, what you suggested is one possibility that we have to analyze in the context, the circumstances of when this happens. It certainly could be a provocation toward diplomacy, you know, a way to gain leverage. The North Koreans understand that once they do a major test, now suddenly, paradoxically, it both narrows the space and creates space for diplomacy in Seoul and Washington. It suddenly gives urgency. Media will start reporting, start asking Biden, hey, what are you doing about North Korea? No one's asking now, but suddenly they'll ask. And the Biden administration will have to have a North Korea strategy, which right now they really don't because no one's asking. So it could be that, but we have to be very careful because it could also be simply technical reasons. You know, Kim Jong-un's rocket guys say, hey, we've waited long enough. We really need to keep progressing here. It's not a provocation to diplomacy. It's not a provocation at all. It could also be internal politics. It could be that Kim Jong-un is really struggling with the economy, no progress on, he's got to show something. And his advisors say, let's show off the one thing we do great. Let's do a big test, pump everyone up. And they're not asking for talks. They're not trying to scuttle talks. It's purely a domestic, like many of us, like South Korea does tests, weapons tests and satellite tests. No one else pays attention. It's for a domestic audience. So that's possible. So I don't think we should prejudge, but it's an excellent question. And then let's see, on the second one, thank you for that too. That was the normative part I never got to. And I'd be very curious what the rest of the panelists think of some of these ideas. I was quite wary in terms of specific, if we're looking for a breakthrough in the next 6 months, what can we do? Besides just saying we're willing to talk in concrete ways. These days, I'm thinking about 2 concrete actions linked to the invitation for serious dialogue. And they're not about denuclearization. They're not framed toward denuclearization. It would be vaccine diplomacy. It's very hard to read. There are mixed signals where North Korea is on the vaccine issue. But I would fully support a South Korea-led U.S. supported. I'd like to see the Biden administration really get behind this, to say we're on board with providing vaccines to the North Korean people. We don't have hostility. We don't have a hostile policy toward the North Korean people. We want to see them vaccinated and healthy just like every other human body on the planet, and absolutely we support that. I don't think we've seen any kind of statement like that. And that would be a concrete action, and you could then test a little bit more what's possible. The other one that I'm not hearing much discussion about, but I think Kim Jong-un's recent open statements about the food insecurity, the food crisis, I would like to see a food assistance offer. And I would like to see a South Korea-led U.S. fully supported. I'd like to see Samantha Powers, a great American diplomat, in her new role as head of USAID, saying, absolutely, we have no hostility to North Korean people. Hungry North Korean women and children and men in their families are hungry human beings and suffering human beings, and we would support relief of that suffering. And yes, that would sort of contradict sanctions at one level. On the other hand, it would substantiate the claim that sanctions are not designed to hurt North Korean people, that they're designed to cut off funding to the weapons programs. So if that's true, then there's not a contradiction between providing assistance and implementing sanctions. And, would the North Koreans accept that? Maybe not. But a serious offer, a real offer, jointly between the United States and South Korea for food assistance, again, directly responding to Kim Jong-un, who has acknowledged that issue, I think would be an interesting signal, and we could see the response.
Good. Thank you very much. 최 원장님.
The exchange between North Korea and the US, that depends on perspective. From the US perspective, so they may have different idea from Korean people, but what the US is saying is that the North Korea is not really meeting the requirements from the US. The North Korea is saying that because of the hostility policy towards North Korea, we cannot come to the table. And North Korea is saying that the US forces in Korea should withdraw from South Korea as a condition for the dialogue, but the US is not really recognizing that argument. And the argument about establishing the Korean Peninsula peace process should be accepted by North Korea. However, North Korea is not fully accepting that concept. So we cannot deny either North Korea or the US. What the US is saying also makes sense. Actually, the US may have the key to the survival of North Korea. After Geneva Convention, the North Korean problems related to the hunger and starving people were greatly resolved after Geneva Convention. In the end of the 1990s, North Korea received the largest amount of assistance from the US. The US didn't have intention to make North Korean people die, because once in the past, the US was one of the largest donor country to North Korea. So now, it seems that after the Korean War, the North Korea created museums commemorating the Korean War and creating hostile images about the U.S. And there are some points for the U.S. There are some points that make it difficult for the U.S. to accept the argument of North Korea. So North Korea is making a lot of arguments, but there are concerns in the U.S. The U.S. feels that North Korea is avoiding dialogue or possible negotiation with the U.S. The U.S. is making efforts, But as long as North Korea possesses the nuclear program, it will not be easy for them to have the negotiation. And as for the Korean peace process, some say that the Korean peace process may sound very radical. The peace process started from the end of the 1990s. But now the Korean peace process is regarded as unrealistic option. And some say that we need to trust North Korea in our peace process, but that is not going to make our policies towards North Korea successful. Why do you think the Hanoi summit failed? In Hanoi summit, the U.S. came up with an evidence. In the Hanoi summit, North Korea actually had said it will dismantle the Yongbyon facilities, but the actual number of nuclear warheads possessed by North Korea was larger than it actually reported. And North Korea has different position. North Korea was saying that we gave up something that were very important to us, but the U.S. is not making any movements. But the U.S. has different opinion. And if North Korea does not disclose its nuclear facilities, North Korea is saying that it will give up nuclear program, which amounts to 70% of the entire nuclear program. But how can we trust that without reliable evidence data? So we need to come up with policies with substantial content that can be actually implemented. What the Korean government is doing is to create hope, create discourse, not substantial, realistic plan and strategic policies. We need to come up with realistic policies, but the Korean government is creating just discourse around peace and hopes for peace.
So I think we have some realistic approach. Thank you for your answer. And very big issue between breakthrough or status quo. We had discussion at almost end of the session. When I mentioned in the beginning, it is some issue that we could not draw conclusion, but very important. It is very some important issue requires a long time discussion and thought. I'm not a specialist in the North issue. However, over the last decades, North policy from the early 1990 about the nuclear issue of North nuclear, we have failed. It is true. There are many reasons that we have failed. Anyway, I think the North has some responsibility and the U.S. has responsibilities for their failure. On the other hand, I think we need to look back on ourselves, the South. In terms of policy, what is important is that kind of maintenance and sustainability of policy. But over the last 20 years, when we look back on the past, actually there were some transition between conservative and the kind of liberal administrations, and we have experienced fluctuations in politics. So there is no consistent North policies, and it was very difficult for us to implement consistent North policy. So in terms of North issue and nuclear issue, actually there are some recognition on the North among the public, and also there is actually we need to put effort to build some public consensus at least. Thank you. All three panelists here, Mr. Ko, his connection is not good. I really apologize for that. Choi Jinuk, John Dillary, Please give them a big round of applause. And thank you all audiences for taking time. It ends of the session. Thank you.